So folks, pay close attention. You're going to want to go look this up. And I give the full details completely documented in the second edition of the Antichrist and Cup of Tea. Here it is, July 28th, at the Commonwealth Games, the 22nd Commonwealth Games for 2022. You have these every few years. They've been going on the whole time. The Queen Elizabeth II was queen. It's the largest set of international games in the world after the Olympics. And this year they had 72 nations and territories participating. Roughly, they estimate almost a third of the world's population potentially watching. Okay, the whole British Commonwealth. At this event, Prince Charles opened it in lieu of the Queen on her behalf. He oversaw the whole thing. He was there in person at the Alexander Stadium in Birmingham, England. Okay. At that event, a giant Molech bull, 10 meters in height, was rolled out into the center of the stadium to be worshipped and to face a large rebuilt right there in front of everybody, mock Tower of Babel with shards in it, and it begins with a star exploding in our solar system. That's how they introduced this. A lot of CGI initially. They portray a star outside our solar system, or maybe deep in our solar system, blowing up past Saturn. A bright star like Lucifer, that's what it is, exploding. And its shards fly through our solar system, and they reach Earth. And they land in all the nations of the Commonwealth. And these 72 quote-unquote dreamers, New Agers, find these shards.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there, you guys. First of all, I did a video on Beetlejuice just recently, and it was pretty amazing. And also, there was a sister long ago that had the Dreamers, and I remember that. And I can't remember in what the association was, but it was something spectacular, and maybe I can look it up a little bit later and see if I can find it. But I just want to share that with you. Let's listen, you guys.
Outside their homes. They retrieve them. The first person to do so is named Stella. She picks it up. It's lit. It's brightly lit. It's like a large quartz crystal. It's bright white, lit as bright white, like an interior light, as it were, bright white. She picks this thing up and she prays to it, whispers to it and prays to it. Then she takes this back to her home. All these others, these 72 dreamers, there's 72 of them total, including her, pick their shards up and they take them to their homes. As soon as they do, there are anti-gravity effects in their homes. Things start to float in the air, and then their homes are lifted up off the ground with these people in them, and they float across the Commonwealth from other nations and across the UK, across seas and oceans and lakes and forests and so forth, to Birmingham, England, to be over the stadium. All these homes floating over the stadium, and then they land. And the dreamers exit them in front of the audience. And they have the shards in hand. The bull then comes onto the stadium, pulled by slavish women on chains. The bull, they portray this, rebels and detaches from the chains. And these female slaves who've been driven by somebody who's kind of like a Roman, a demon, whatever. He didn't quite look like a Roman, are freed, right? So now the bull and these women are freed, and they pretend they're afraid of each other. And the bull goes on to the center of the stadium, and these quote-unquote dreamers, these New Agers, encircle the thing. But initially, before they do that, Stella comes with her crystal. She and 5 others, there are 6 of them, 6 of the dreamers, apart from these slavish women who are behind now on the bull to either side of it as it's moving, kind of charging actually, into the center of the stadium. Okay, from the track, from just outside where it's entered, now detached from its chain, no longer restrained. Okay, charges into the center of the stadium. Stella, wanting to appease this thing so that they're not killed by this Molech idol, goes with this New Age crystal, approaches it slowly with these 5 other dreamers. She's got the crystal in her left hand, and then she puts her hand up to the nose of the bull, and it bows down so that she can touch its nose with the crystal in her hand. She's the only one holding her crystal at that point. And the bull is, at least at that moment, appeased. And there's a whole backstory to this, and they say things, they announce things to the audience, about peace, love, friendship, yada, yada, conflict resolves, slaves freed, all this kind of stuff. And as this is happening, the slavish, and there are multiple stages to this, so I'm going to be skipping over some things, but this bull kind of calms down. It's facing the Tower of Babel this whole time. And at times there are flames like the towers, like the flames of hell all over this Tower of Babel, okay? And it's facing this thing. The bull is. They encircle it multiple times, and they literally worship it. They've all got their crystals in hand. They bow down to this thing. And then later, Stella gets atop it and rides it as the woman riding the beast. And there are then 71 dreamers encircling it. And they're bowing down to this thing, worshiping it, and literally doing a New Age worship ceremony with their crystals before this thing, and inviting the whole Commonwealth to join them in this worship. And who's overseeing all of this? Prince Charles. And then the woman's riding the beast, right? And as we get toward the end of the ceremony, and there are a bunch of songs, by the way, that are accommodating this with significant lyrics, okay? And I won't go into that, but it's all documented in the book. At the end,
okay,
as it's getting dark.
Which book is this?
This is going to be in the second edition of the Antichrist Cup of Tea. One reason it's a little bit delayed is I have to get this in there. It's too critical. Okay? Right there at the end, the bull is rearing back. So it's rising up on its front feet. Okay? And it's encircled by the flags of all these nations, the 72. They've literally placed their flags at the base of this thing. So they're not just worshiping it with their crystals and all the rest, and not just being ridden by Stella, the woman riding the beast. Now the tower is rising again before this beast. It's been built. And all the nations, by the way, their names have gone across this tower already, at this point, been displayed on its surface. At the top of this tower, I told you those shards came down earlier from the heavens. This blown up Luciferian star, representing the devil, reaching the earth, falling to the earth. The devil falling to the earth, okay?
Okay, so I just want to make sure if I didn't say it before, the name Beetlejuice means Lucifer or devil. Here we go.
And being taken up by these New Agers. So they all approach, they leave the bull now, but the flags are at the base of the bull, showing the nations are all worshiping around this bull, the 71. And I'm going to come back to the number 71. It's extremely significant. But at any rate, they all come to the base of this tower with their shards in hand, and they stick them into the side of the tower, and they ascend visibly through the tower. And as they get toward the top of the tower, they form this ball, the original star that blew up, reconstituted, and then it rises above the tower, and you get this huge disco-like ball atop the tower that's lit up very brightly, and a beam of light goes between that ball and the chest of the ball. Now it's nighttime at this point in Alexander Stadium, an open-air stadium, so you can see these lights, but they're portraying the rebuilding of the Tower of Babel in our day, with Lucifer being over it, being worshipped by all the nations of the world. And why do I say all? I said that the 72 dreamers were for the 72, they're for the 72 nations and territories of the British Commonwealth, right? Stella being the 72nd, she's riding the bull. Why 71 worshiping around the bull? Okay, how does that represent all the nations? Well, here's the deal. At the Feast of Tabernacles every year, Israel would sacrifice 70 bulls. Not 71, 70. And Israel's rabbis historically understood that to represent the nations that came out of the scattering from the Tower of Babel. So they took those 70 to represent the nations of the world. And the way Christians and often the rabbinic community have interpreted those 70 bulls that were sacrificed, they would say, well, we have our God and we worship him and we do sacrifices on behalf of Israel. This is how it would be interpreted, right? So these 70 are for the nations. And oftentimes Christians look at that and they think this is a sacrifice on behalf of the nations, so that maybe their sins would be forgiven. The ones who don't worship the God of Israel at the Feast of Tabernacles each year, it was never that. That is not what it ever in history represented. So I'm going to come back to what it did represent in a moment. It did represent the 70 nations, that's correct. But the reason there were 71 around the base of this bowl is because Israel was included. You see, the nation of Israel came after the 70 at the Tower of Babel, right?
Interesting.
So now they're saying, oh, Israel, by the way, you're not going to worship your God anymore. You're going to worship Lucifer with us. So there's 71 instead of 70 at the base of this bowl, led by the woman riding the beast, representing if you want, the harlot church under the Antichrist, okay?
Wow.
Well, what were the sacrifices really about at Tabernacles, the 70 bulls? Was it for the sins of the nations? I'm going to tell you no. It was their death and destruction, their crushing by the Messiah at Armageddon. That's what it really represented. When God, our God, sacrifices the nations like brute beasts, man without understanding is like the beasts that perish. That is what Scripture tells us multiple times. Those nations that did not worship God, that were at the base of the Tower of Babel historically, were not worshipers of the real God. They were engaging in paganism. And God scattered them to the nations. He brought a nation separate from them, a new nation, Israel, the 71, the 71st, okay? So we can look in Revelation 19, in Ezekiel 39. We can see that when the Lord is done with Armageddon, that the birds of prey come down to eat the flesh of the slain. Like beasts, right? The flesh is slain, like man without understanding. Sacrifice like beasts. How do we know that the world is like beasts in that context to God? In Acts chapter 10 through 15, in chapter 10, Peter was shown a scroll. He was atop a house, a rooftop. A scroll rolled down from the heavens before him. And in it were beasts of all kinds, creatures, crawly things, right? Different kinds of life. And 3 times God said to Peter, "Arise, slay and eat." And 3 times Peter refused. He rebuked God. He said, "Not so, Lord." Almost in an angry tone. "Not so, Lord. Nothing common or unclean has ever entered my mouth or passed my lips," right? And the 3rd time, and each time God said to Peter, what God calls clean, do not call, what God, I forget the exact wording, but what God sanctifies basically don't call common or unclean. That's essentially what he says to Peter each time. And at that moment, the scroll disappears. But the whole point is, these nations that Peter saw were represented as unclean beasts. And most of the nations of the world, many of them, even to this day, have unclean animals, what would biblically be considered unclean to eat, as their symbols.